little bit on what's going on in Israel because it's obviously incredibly important. The situation in Israel continues to devolve. Over the course of the weekend, where unfortunately we weren't broadcasting, violence continued, over 100 dead on the Palestinian side. I've heard various numbers for the Israeli side. Most recently I saw 3.
Yeah,
but
3 or 4.
Many more injured, 70, 80 injured. So obviously the situation is horrible. Now, how much direct influence does America have over what happens? If we were to exercise our power in terms of military funding, perhaps we would have influence. Right now, we are not exercising that. Barack Obama went on the record as saying that Israel has every right to defend themselves, although defend is an interesting word when used in this context. But one person, Senator McCain, does want America to have some role, and he has actually advocated for Bill Clinton being sent over to help to try to patch over some of the problems. Let's actually go to his quote.
I'd find someone even as high-ranking, frankly, as former President Bill Clinton to go and be the negotiator. I know he'd hate me for saying that, but we need a person of enormous prestige and influence to have these parties sit down together as an honest broker. But we have a lot of work to do.
I like that he's willing to do that. I think that it's interesting that a Republican senator is saying we need somebody with foreign policy credentials, somebody serious, that the people will respect. Not George W. Bush. Let's go back to the last Democrat, actually. Do you think it would be wise? Do you think Bill Clinton could help?
Well, Bill Clinton does have some powerful negotiating capabilities. I don't know if you guys know this about current TV, but when Laura Ling and Yoon Lee were trapped in North Korea, it was Bill Clinton that went over and negotiated and got them out. So he clearly does have some good negotiating capabilities. I think it's a little bit obviously of a jab at President Obama that McCain didn't say that Obama should go over there and negotiate, and he thinks that Obama doesn't have as much clout and as much standing over there because back in 2009 he asked Benjamin Netanyahu to stop the Jewish settlements and make peace with the Palestinians, and so he's thinking now Obama isn't as on as good of ground perhaps as he should be to negotiate this.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously historically Bill Clinton involved in the peace process there during his presidency, some success, some failures. I honestly don't know at this point if his previous experience there would help him or hurt him. I would guess it would help him to some extent, but with the scale of the violence, I don't know what short-term impact he's going to be able to have on there. I mean, you have a situation where Israel now feels more secure than they were in the past. They have Iron Dome. They're protected to some extent from the incredibly weak weapons that the Palestinians had that were formerly at least somewhat threatening to Israel. So at this point, I don't really understand why Israel would back down. They're in a strong position to do whatever they want. Damn what America thinks. They're going to get the money from America either way. Yeah, so let's talk briefly about some of the data about what Americans believe and what Israelis believe about what's going on. I don't think we have this in graphic form, but I'll fill it in for you. CNN did a poll to talk to Americans and see, do you support what Israel is doing? 57% of Americans believe Israel is justified in their military action against the Hamas militants. Framed that way, at least, they're in favor of it. If they understood how many civilians were dying, maybe the number would be a little bit lower. But 25% believe that the attacks are currently unjustified, and another fifth have no opinion. That's actually positive. I would expect that in these situations, when it comes to foreign policy matters that are relatively new, more Americans wouldn't have an opinion. Now, if you actually talk to Democrats as opposed to Republicans, 74% of Republicans believe that Israel is justified, while just 41% of Democrats agree. Now, it's interesting that in terms of the base, the actual people voting, there's this huge gap between Republicans and Democrats and how they view what Israel should do. I would imagine that if you polled Republican and Democratic senators and representatives, the gap would be much smaller, and they'd almost universally be in support of Israel's right to defend themselves.
Right, I think that this does fall along party lines, and I think you brought up an interesting point too, where perhaps if people knew how many civilians were being killed. For example, today, the most recent numbers we have are that in the strike today, 12 Palestinian civilians were killed and only 4 fighters were killed. So the ratio is just out of control here about the number of civilian lives that they're taking compared to the number of actual Hamas fighters that they're taking. And
unfortunately, the numbers that you see when you read any of these reports are the same numbers that you've seen every time violence is broken out between Israel and Palestine. It's always 100 dead on the Palestinian side, 50 to 60% of them civilians, 150 rockets fired at Israel. They always have to focus on the sheer number of weapons because the casualties are so low. Now look, any casualties are unacceptable, and the fact that at least 3 Israelis up to this point have died is unacceptable, and just purely strategically unwise from the Palestinians' point of view, because look what's happening to them as a result of it. But again, 100-3, these are the sorts of numbers we've seen over the last 20, 30, 40 years whenever violence breaks out between the two countries.
And I think this is only going to keep escalating. There have been talks of a ceasefire, but really no side has any sign of backing down or shown any sign that they're willing to back down unless the other side meets their demands first, and both sides are saying, well, that's not happening. So I think this is going to just continue to get worse over the next few days.